Good afternoon. We're here today for the endorsement interview for the 3rd Congressional District, which includes most of Portland and extends east to Mount Hood. We have with us incumbent Congressman Earl Blumenauer. We're awaiting his Republican opponent, Joanna Arbor. Not sure if she's going to join us, so we'll just get started with you, Congressman Blumenauer. Please introduce yourself, give us a brief bio, and then we'll move on to some questions.
My name is Earl Blumenauer. I've been privileged to serve this community my entire professional career. Voters have entrusted me to serve in our legislature, in the county, in the city, and for over 2 decades, it's been my honor to serve the people of the 3rd Congressional Districts in the United States Congress.
You are now a member of the Ways and Means Committee, is that correct?
That's correct.
I should know this, but I don't recall how long you've been a member of that committee.
I've been on the committee, I think, 14 years.
Okay.
I'm one of the 4 most senior members of that body.
So it would be insulting and misleading to say that with seniority comes certain privileges or certain powers, and obviously that's sometimes true, sometimes not true. But could you tell us what in the past 2 years since we last saw you for an endorsement interview, you've used your the accumulated wisdom and experience that you've had in your 25 years in the building? What has that meant to your constituents in terms of bills that you've introduced, bills that you've worked on, initiatives that you've been part of?
It's a great question, and it's I'm very proud. This has been one of the most productive eras that I've had in Congress, even though in the COVID crisis moment, it's been very upsetting. It's been hard to work through. There's been such churn and dissension. But we've been able, for example, most recently, people have seen we've taken a legislative idea, which actually we worked with a number of people in Portland, creating an independent restaurant coalition to address the fact that the largest area of unemployment in America has been independent restaurants. And they are the lifeblood of our communities, our neighborhoods, a very essential part of our economy. This is a sector that saw half the unemployment in April come from the 11 million restaurant workers. We were able to draft, craft, and get involved, put into the House legislation for the next round of the economic recovery. It wasn't in the first round. We were working with people around the country to develop the momentum, to refine the proposal. We were able to get over 200 people who've co-sponsored it. I've worked with Roger Wicker and the US Senate on a companion piece of legislation that has 40 senators, including the minority leader, Chuck Schumer. The guy I've been working with most closely is the leader over there, Roger Wicker, a Republican from Mississippi, Lindsey Graham, and we have been able to, in this next round, where the Democrats were reducing the size of their package, we were able to carve out $120 billion for grants to help rescue the restaurants. We've been able to build momentum for this moving forward. We're going to have a vote immediately after the election to legalize cannabis. The MORE Act that I've been working on for the last 2 years, the best piece of cannabis legislation that we've seen in the House ever, is going to be voted on for the first time in history. I have legislation moving to
Can I slow you down? You've been very prolific. We'd love to have a little bit more. I've read about the restaurant piece. $120 billion is an unimaginable amount of money for a small state like Oregon. We don't have anything that, so how's that going to work in practice if the Senate goes along with its companion legislation? Will we see we've all got our favorite neighborhood independent restaurant. That's so much money. Is it likely to flow down to literally sort of everybody? I saw that there are provisions that keeps it from going to chains, and it keeps it
Right.
going to
Right.
Publix.
It is crafted to speak specifically to smaller independent restaurants. Chains are not eligible. In fact, we will put and these are grants, not the PPP loans, which
Right.
have posed problems for smaller business. These would be grants. And the $120 billion nationally would be sequenced so that small restaurants, particularly women and minority-owned, would get priority for the first round. It would go to them first. These.
Sorry to interrupt. When the PPP program was going through, there were, of course, that was early in the pandemic, relatively speaking. There were a lot of complications because so many different banks were involved.
Right.
It was hard.
Right.
People had difficulty with the paperwork.
Right.
Administratively, it was very complex and difficult.
Absolutely.
This sounds like it may be different. I know it hasn't passed yet, so two questions. Do you think the Senate will go along? And if so, how's it going to work in terms of money?
It was designed to avoid the problems that we had with PPP. First of all, the reason it was so cumbersome and took so long and there was so much paperwork was that it was a loan program.
Yeah.
And the loan forgiveness was predicated on jumping through a series of hoops. And we still don't know all of those hoops. There's still ambiguity. This is a grant program that avoids that. It is predicated on dealing with the difference with what people make this year versus what they made last year. And that difference will be a grant. It is designed to avoid those problems. And you're right, it sounds like a lot of money. But we have, and if we haven't sent you, I will send it after this conversation. We have an economic analysis that this $120 billion for the grant program actually will save the federal government $183 billion because we avoid the costs of unemployment. We have people actually paying taxes rather than going bankrupt. It looks like 80 to 85% of these independent restaurants, if we don't do something this year, will go out of business permanently. And we've also been working with people in the supply chain, people who provide cheese and fruits and vegetables, right down to the linens that are supplied. This supply chain is kept intact and it keeps them in the game. So I think it's relatively, I think it's clear that it will save far more than it will cost, which is one of the reasons why we even have interest with the Trump administration. The independent restaurants had a fascinating meeting in the White House with Mnuchin, with Trump, where they expressed interest in this. And the latest back and forth between Nancy Pelosi and Mnuchin before Trump pretended like he was going to walk away from all of this, and then he rediscovered it, that they both had money in their negotiating positions set aside for this program.
Okay. So you're optimistic about passage if it gets to the Senate, or that it will be part of the package that's agreed on?
Well, I am pleased with what we've done. I mean, this is something that I think 6 months ago people didn't think was possible. It is possible. It's on the table. It's in the House package, and we've got action in the Senate and interest with the White House. These are crazy times, but I think we're well positioned to help support and save independent restaurants, a sixth of which have already gone out of business.
So cannabis, that's been a big priority for you for some time. You're going to get a vote, you said, after the election.
Yes.
And again, I mean, of course, the Senate may look very different after the election. what level of optimism do you have that in 2021 that cannabis could be federally legal?
Well, we've caught the wave. And this legislation is going to pass comfortably on the floor of the House. We already had a landmark vote earlier this year on the Safe Banking Act that had 321 affirmative votes, every Democrat but one, and we had about 40% of the Republicans. My cannabis research bill is moving to the floor as well. What we have seen, and it's something that I've been proud to help lead. As you know, I've been campaigning on this from Bangor, Maine to Santa Barbara in states on the state level. I've worked on all of the initiatives on the federal level. I started when Oregon was the first state to decriminalize cannabis in 1973. I've been working on this. We've reached a point now where as recently as 10 years ago, only about a third of the public favored full legalization. Now, over 2/3 of the public support full legalization. A majority of Republicans favor it. We have Republican senators who are going to support that, including one, Cory Gardner, who's just been frantic to move this forward. I think you're going to see this fall in Montana, in Nebraska, and North Dakota. You're going to see state actions come forward. And this is one of the few areas of direct revenue to state and local government. You've seen revenues explode in Oregon. It's increasingly important around the country. This is money that's not taken up. It's an opportunity to deal with unmet needs. And every day that goes by, we're watching more momentum build. We have, in the last 2 years, we've seen cannabis be completely legalized in Canada and in Mexico, as well as what's happened in the vast majority of states. So there's been a remarkable progress that's taken place, and the evidence about what difference it makes, for example, with medical marijuana, that's like the 4th of July. That's supported by 80% of the public. So these are things that have been building. I am quite confident even that we're going to be able to extend these protections this Congress. And I think legalization will take place early in the next Congress after we pass the MORE Act in the House next month.
So not to belabor the point, but if you were a rookie, would you be able to have the kind of traction on these two issues, the restaurant grants and the MORE Act, or all your work on cannabis? Would you be able to have the platform that you have on those?
No. This is the result of working on these issues for decades. What we did with the independent restaurants, I have long-term relationships with the farmers and ranchers, the restaurant people, having worked with them and being able to develop the national network to move this forward. And people in Oregon helped me craft this legislation and work through the details to make it compatible with what's going on in the Senate. If you walk through the door tomorrow or 2 years ago, you're not going to be able to do this. That what I've done with cannabis is the result of national leadership for decades. I am recognized as the elected official that's been doing more on this longer. I've given more press interviews than I think the next 5 people in Congress combined. We deal with the nitty-gritty. My staff is recognized as being experts by the committee staff. We basically worked in a seamless fashion with the Judiciary Committee, which was pretty busy this year with things like impeachment. No, this is something that you build credibility, you build the knowledge, you build the staff capacity and the relationships that have people trust you and move forward. And in both of these cases, my experience, my relationship with the Democratic leadership, and frankly, with Republicans, because I've worked to make these nonpartisan. And you just don't walk through the door and be able to do this.
Given your long experience with cannabis, it's a different question, but I'd like to hear your thoughts. I know it's a local issue, not a federal issue, but we have on the ballot a very interesting Measure 110. You're probably familiar with it, brought to us by the Drug Policy Alliance, that would decriminalize for personal use what we have previously called hard drugs. What are your thoughts on Measure 110?
Well, I'm supporting it. I've been involved and encouraged. I think this is one of the next important phases to be able to recognize how we understand the capacity of these substances. First and foremost, we should not be engaging with law enforcement on something that is not in and of itself something that warrants criminal activity. I've been long active in terms of decriminalization. Now, these measures, as you know, would not enable people to traffic in it. It doesn't allow the safe, but has it regulated and move forward. I think that's important. We see countries around the globe who've had a much more, I think, reasonable approach to these controlled substances. They have better records than we have dealing with substance abuse. I don't want people to abuse these. These are not benign any more than cannabis is benign. I've fought to keep it out of the hands of children. I've never used it and won't until it's completely legal on the federal level. But that doesn't mean it should be criminalized. That's crazy. And we're watching the powerful therapeutic after. A friend of mine is Michael Pollan, and I've done a lot of work with Michael on food reform. The last time we had lunch in Washington, D.C., I was talking to him about his projects, and he pivoted and told me what he was doing in this arena. And I got his book. I was fascinated. What was the magic mushroom or whatever the movie was that was shown down at Cinema 21. I mean, there's something going on here. We need to understand it. We need to be able to research it. We need to be able to use it in a thoughtful therapeutic fashion under controlled, supervised conditions. But we ought not to criminalize the use. And I think this ballot measure is a step in the right direction, and I support it.
Nigel, do you mind if I ask a question?
Please.
I know yesterday, Congressman, you introduced legislation to limit the powers of the U.S. Marshal Service when federally deputizing local police officers. I'm wondering, are there other areas where you feel concern about federal law enforcement's overreach throughout the country or specific to Oregon?
Well, this epitomizes what I think is a really important area that needs more attention. Deputizing these people, regardless of the wishes of local government, in effect, conscripting them, I think is outrageous and inappropriate. I think it may well successfully be challenged in the courts. They shouldn't be able, in effect, to reach down and use local law enforcement or anybody else to conscript them. I think that's inappropriate. It's contrary to the 10th Amendment. We've never had problems like this before because people were able to sort of follow some sort of reasonable path forward. But this administration is not involved with a reasonable path forward. We saw what happened on Lafayette Square in Washington, D.C., where they used National Guard people from Utah and other federal agencies to move in and clear out peaceful protesters, forcibly removing them in order that Trump had a photo op with the Bible, which he held upside down. We've got an administration that ignores those norms, And so we need to work to establish some guardrails. You saw what they did here. Things were happening to try and calm down a very difficult and tense situation in our community, an area of deep concern. And by their actions, they stepped in, I think purposely stirred it up, again, for political purposes, get footage and talking points for Trump and his administration, which I think is outrageous. They made things worse here for weeks, and it's just unconscionable.
We just got a couple more minutes. We'll let you go, but I'm sorry to ask you again about another local measure. You've talked about how COVID may be changing everything, and one of the things that certainly has changed is people's working patterns and commuting patterns and their driving patterns. I'm wondering if you support or oppose the metro transportation measure, which, you know, they spent a lot of time, 2 years, putting it together. It's a pre-COVID model. You voting for it, against it?
I'm voting for it. I've been involved with those conversations. I was very impressed with what dozens of local stakeholders involving several thousand people in the community to try and have a vision about what goes forward. And I know that there are some people that take exception with some aspects of it, but I think it's really important for us to be able to come out of this situation with some potential significant investment. And infrastructure investment in our community is one of the ways that we can get the economy back on track. I know that some people, again, have some differences. One of the things that I think nobody disputes is how hard they worked to be able to focus resources east of 82nd, an area that I've been working to try and get help for years in terms of improving safety, economic development. We have a bill that we passed for infrastructure. Peter DeFazio navigated that through the House, and something I worked on, that if we have a Biden administration, there's going to be significant infrastructure money that is available to us locally. And this ballot measure will provide a framework for guiding this that the public has been involved with. And I think it would help us with a rapid recovery, which we desperately need.
Okay, thank you. We are out of time. We have one last question. You've been on 1 million of these calls since the pandemic started. What's the most embarrassing, painful, funny, memorable moment you've had on a Zoom call during that time? And we're asking we're asking all candidates that, by the way, not just you.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, there are days when it's virtually nonstop conference calls, Zoom calls. You hear my clock striking in the background here. One of the things that I discovered, to my chagrin, that when you're on a Zoom call with some of the WebEx platform, that you slip off, and if you've got another call that you have to take or you have to deal with other business, and then you get back on it, you are no longer muted.
Oh.
You get back on and it's a live mic.
Okay.
And I don't fully know exactly what I was talking about, but I got some heated text from the team saying, do you know that you're live? I thought I had muted, and I discovered, to my chagrin, that when you slip back and forth on this platform, you are all of a sudden live with no telling what might happen.
Okay. Well, thank you. We hope you'll avoid that in the future. Thanks for spending time with us today. I'm sorry your opponent was not able to join us.
Well, I appreciated the conversation and the questions. I do hope that there will be an opportunity sometime to talk about some of the implications of these things, because I truly think this is the 26-month agenda. If I'm successful in being reelected, this is what will happen immediately after the election and in the next 2 years. And it's all going to be different in terms of how we operate. It's going to be different in terms of some of our priorities, the economics, and the social dynamics. And I'm looking forward to having these conversations with the public. One thing, if I can just put one of the things that I've been really excited that we've worked on this last year deals with housing. And a year ago, I put out a report that talked about getting the federal government back into the housing game, which I was actually quite proud of, and I'm involved with updating it. But we're having a town hall this next week, I think it's next Thursday, with AOC, one of my partners federally, going forward with housing. And it'll be in our 2 districts where we talk about the housing challenges in Brooklyn and in Portland, and where we go from here with the federal government and the advocates. And I think it's going to be fun.
Great. Okay. Well, thanks again, Congressman. It's great to see you.
You bet. Have a good afternoon.
You too.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.